Welcome back to Flat Iron's Tuning. We're going to try something new here. We're going to do the top 5 things that you need to know if you're going to pick an oil filter for your car. So, number 1, is the filter correct for your car? Seems pretty simple, but that is definitely the place you want to start. Most manufacturers will give applications, but you want to make sure that the overall design from the manufacturer is correct for your vehicle, or if you're using an OEM filter, that it's the correct one for your car. There are a lot of variances out there with oil filters in terms of the internal build, internal structure, fitment, and those sorts of things. So the place to start is to make sure that it's correct for your car. Number 2 is the filter media. So what is inside the filter that is actually doing the filtering? There's different types of filter media. There's paper filters. There's cellular, like a synthetic cellular filter media. And if you want to get into the specifics of it, you can actually get into the size of the openings in the filter media. What micron is the filter? So if you have specific goals for how aggressive of a filter you want, as far as how many particles is it going to block from getting into the engine, you need to know what the filter media is and what the rating of that filter media is. Sometimes that's available, sometimes it's not. Not all manufacturers make that detail available, but if that's something that you really want to drill down on, the internet is your friend, and you could probably find the information that you need there. All right, number 3 is the anti-drainback valve. If your car's filter was designed to have an anti-drainback valve, you want to make sure that the filter that you're using also has the anti-drainback valve. It basically prevents oil, when you turn the car off, it prevents all of the oil from coming out of the engine and draining into the pan. Kind of holds, the oil in the engine, so that you basically have a more continuous protection, lubrication for the engine, every time you start the car. So if the car is designed to have that, it's probably best to always pick a filter that does have that drainback valve as well. Number 4 is bypass valve pressure. So there is a valve inside the filter where if something happens where, like say the filter has got a lot of stuff that it's holding and it's clogged or something like that, and there's a pressure that builds up from the oil coming into the filter, the valve can open, the bypass valve opens, to ensure that oil is still getting into the engine. The rationale here being that getting some oil into the engine, even if it's dirty, is better than getting no oil in, because there's some kind of an issue with the filter. And manufacturers will basically design their oiling system and their filter to have a specific bypass valve pressure. And so if you're looking at a different oil filter, it's a good thing to double check that bypass valve pressure to make sure that it's in the same range as what the factory designed your car to have. That way you make sure that the valve doesn't open too soon or not soon enough. So that's one of those key details for the makeup of the filter. Kind of back to point number 1, why it's important to get a filter that is correct for your car. Number 5, and this one is a little bit harder to monitor, is pressure drop. So because the filter sits between the oil pump and your engine, it basically is the last thing that the oil goes through before it goes into your engine. And because there is filtering being done, the oil filter can have a bit of an impact on what the oil pressure is once it actually gets into your engine to do its job. And depending on the type of filter and the media, the build, all of those aspects, the filter does have an impact in some cases of what the oil pressure is actually is once it gets into your car. And so it's a hard one to monitor unless you have an oil pressure gauge, and ideally an oil pressure gauge connected to something like maybe even a standalone ECU that can do data logging. And in that case, to make sure that you're getting proper oil pressure to the engine, you would want to, if you've been using one filter, filter A, and you switch to filter B, you'd want to look at the oil pressure in the engine over a normal usage case, and just verify that you're getting at least the same oil pressure, if not a little bit better oil pressure. That's one of the reasons, if you've watched our video about the Roger Clark filters, they tested and designed their filter to be a little bit less restrictive to allow more oil into the engine. And so we have seen, and others have seen, a slight increase in oil pressure with the Roger Clark filter over, say, something like the Tokyo Roki filter. But that would definitely be something, especially for motorsports application or racing application, if you're comparing filter A and filter B, that would be the final kind of key piece of information that you'd want to use to weigh to decide which filter you'd want to use. All right, and just as a last point, and this kind of goes for anybody, if you really want to know if the filter is doing a good enough job in protecting your engine well enough, there really is no substitution for the information that oil analysis can give you. If you've done an oil analysis, once or twice with filter A, or maybe a handful of times, and you have a lot of data from filter A, and then you switch to filter B, well, send some of that oil out and get the analysis and get the data back, and then you can see, how is filter B comparing to filter A. Now, there's a lot of variables at play here. The use case of the car, the oil that you're using. Is it the same oil, the same weight, that sort of thing. The duration, the age of the engine. Like, there can be other effects here. It is not as obvious an apples-to-apples comparison necessarily, but having that data is always going to give you something to compare back to versus not having it at all. And if you really want to know as much as ironclad as possible, if filter B is doing the same or an equivalent job to filter A, something like an analysis where you can measure the particulates, dust, dirt, contents of the oil when you get to the end of your change interval. That's probably going to be the very best way to do it. All right, well, that's it. So hopefully that gives you some good points of information to look at and kind of weigh the differences between one filter and the next to pick the next oil filter for your car. Or even if you're happy with the filter that you're using, maybe it gives you some ideas of things to look for to make sure that oil filter is working well enough for you for your application. So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you found this video helpful. And until next time, as always, stay tuned with Flat Iron's Tuning.